Good day. I'm IAD Bound from the Wheels Up Live podcast,
And I am Felix from the Wheels Up Live podcast.
and we'd like to welcome you to what will be a series of tutorials covering the PMDG 777 and how to operate it, what it does, why it does it, and hopefully you will find this both instructive and also informative in terms of how some of these systems work and why you do what you do in the 777. A couple of housekeeping notes. I am not a type-rated 777 pilot. Felix is not a type-rated 777 pilot. However, we have both flown this plane extensively, and we have both studied this plane extensively. And so most of what we're going to show you here is going to be pretty close to real-world operations for the 777. However, you definitely do not want to use this for any real-world operation. Standard disclaimer. We'll also add that we have been assisted in part by a type-rated 777 pilot, and that's Yas. Yas flew for a major European carrier for many years, flew the 777, and for those of you that are interested in Yas, because he is a great guy who has given much to this community, we have an interview with him right here on the Wheels Up Live channel that we did a couple of months ago. So go check that out. For those of you who are wondering, we are at San Francisco. This is the Flight Beam San Francisco Captain's Edition. Mir is the developer of this product. It's a great product. Check it out. And we thank Mir for this. In addition, this livery that you're looking at is by Steve Drabeck, who is a well-known painter in the community. He's worked with PMDG and many others. This particular livery is available on flightsim.to. So again, thanks to him.
All right, so as you can see here, we are at gate G3 at the Gulf Gates in San Francisco. There's no jetway connected, or there are not any stairs. The reason for that is we thought that we would want to show the aircraft kind of in full instead of it being blocked by certain parts. And mainly, we wanted to show you that the state we are in right now and the state we are going to talk about the pre-flight from is cold and dark. So we have cold and dark state on the aircraft, meaning there's no power, it's not energized. However, it is connected to the GPU. And so just a little note about that. In the real world, this aircraft, if this is the first flight of the day, would have been towed from the United maintenance hangar or some overnight parking by maintenance. They would have parked it here. The jetway would be connected, and maintenance would have done a preliminary ETOPS, especially if this jet was going to be used for an over-ocean flight. They would have done the extended ETOPS check and powered the aircraft on. So as the crew, they would have come on to the aircraft. The aircraft would have already been powered on, and ground power would have been established. So a lot of what we're going to show you now is more of an amplified procedure versus what would happen in the real world, in which the pilot's going to show up, they're going to do their pre-flight, get the aircraft ready for departure, and then it would be on its way to the destination. And so now we're going to go ahead and go on the inside of the cockpit to see what that looks like.
Okay, here we are on the inside. You'll notice here that the cockpit view that we have is not the default cockpit view. This is a custom cockpit view that I have saved to use here in the sim. You'll notice that the position that I've selected here is slightly lower than the default. This is so that I can see the entirety of the primary flight display and the navigation display. But otherwise, there's no activity going on in the plane. As we said, it's in a cold and dark state. In order to perform the electrical power startup, the place where you're going to begin your activity is at the overhead panel, which we have moved to. As you can see here, there's really no activity on the panel except that we see the two available lights on both the primary external power and the secondary external power. As a practical matter, you don't just turn the power on. There is a preliminary safety check involved in this process.
All right, so with this safety check, the Boeing philosophy for viewing these panels, all right, you're going to start from top left and work your way to bottom right. All right, so you go top to bottom, left to right, columns 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. And that's just kind of that's a Boeing philosophy with a lot of aircraft. Now, the reason that we do this safety check before we establish ground power is because there are systems, specifically the hydraulic system, that if they do get any 115 volt, 400 hertz AC current flowing into them to energize those particular pumps, they can start activating pieces that you may not want activated. Specifically, if the flap lever's out, somebody's working on the wing or something like that, and the flaps start moving or the slat starts moving while the fueler is trying to fuel the aircraft, or that's just an example. But this is why you do the preliminary cockpit safety check, is because if you do energize specifically the hydraulic pumps with maybe a setting that is not correct. For instance, if you have the flap handle in, say, flaps 5, those flaps are going to start moving because the electrical system does work once and provides full pressure once it has that 115 volt, 400 hertz current going to it. So that is the reason that we're going to start with the preliminary safety check, which also includes the electric startup and power on procedure. And now we are going to turn on the battery switch by clicking the switch and turning on the battery to the bus.
Okay, so we've got the battery on the bus. Felix, I don't hear anything. I don't see anything. What's going on?
Well, that's because the battery could not possibly supply both the voltage and the current to run most of the electrical systems in the aircraft.
Ah, okay. So that's why we're not seeing anything on the screens yet. So we still need to have additional power.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to find out what the rest of that is here in just a minute.
And the first thing you're going to want to check before you establish ground power is the hydraulic panel. All right. So if you go to the second column about the middle, you'll see a big hydraulic. There will be a box, and then there will be on the sides, you'll see primary on the left and right side, and you'll see demand on the left and right side. The first two switches you're going to want to make sure are in the off position are the C1 and C2 electric pumps. All right. The reason being is, again, if you were to establish ground power right now and those switches were on, you would pressurize the hydraulic system, and that could negatively impact the aircraft if the landing gear handle was up, if the flaps was in a selection that wasn't 0. These things could start moving, and that could be detrimental to both the aircraft itself or to any personnel that are working around the aircraft.
All right, well, the next thing in our preliminary safety check is you need to look at the wipers. And the wipers are located at the bottom of column 1 and column 4. And if you look here, you'll see that both the left wiper and the right wiper are in the off position. It just so happens, and this is true of the hydraulic pumps too, that the way the PMDG setup works, when you come into this plane in this cold and dark state, which is a panel state, for those of you that are not familiar with how PMDG describes these things, the switches are usually in the right position. But of course, in the real world, they might not be. And so, from a preliminary safety perspective, you do want to check it. Now, you might be asking, why do I care if the wipers are on or off? You know, my car, it doesn't really matter. Well, on these airplanes, if the wipers are on and you provide external power or power from the APU, they may begin moving. If the windscreen is dry and the wipers start moving, there is a high probability that they will scratch up the windscreen in a way that will cost the airline a significant amount of money to replace. So if you are trying not to get cut from your virtual pilot job, make sure that those wipers are off. Your next step in the preliminary safety check is to double check that the landing gear lever is actually down, which you can see here it is. Again, this is typical of PMDG. The lever is going to be in the correct position. But of course, in the real world, I guess anything is possible. Hopefully, maintenance noticed that it's not in the up position when they brought the plane over to the stand. But meanwhile, it is in the down position. Even if it wasn't in the down position and you started up the plane will not collapse. But it's still an important point to check before you move on to the next step in this procedure.
And as a note, for anybody who has any hardware, specifically the Honeycomb Bravo, if you see the gear lever continually trying to go up, so you'll hear it click and it won't actually engage in the up position, but it keeps going up. There's a physical lock here that's preventing that. That is because your handle on your hardware is actually in the up position and not in the down position. So just something to be aware of if you keep getting that and you think, oh, is this a bug or something? It's not a bug. It is the position of your hardware gear selection, whatever you're using for that.
After you've checked the landing gear, the next thing we're going to check is the alternate flaps button. In some planes, it might look a little different, but in this one, it's a button. And it's sort of hidden over here on the pedestal. It is just next to the actual flap lever. And as you can see, it's a guarded button that says alternate flaps. And what you want to double check is that it's off. And obviously, you can see here in this state that indeed it's off.
A note about guarded switches is, and this is across manufacturers and across manufacturing philosophy and operational philosophy types, is that as a general rule, guarded switches are to remain in whatever position they're left in, unless a checklist calls for the switch to be used in for any reason. All right. Usually there's a reason it's guarded. It's because if you do it, there may be some function that once you've done it, you cannot undo it until the plane is back on the ground or in a maintenance shed or maintenance hangar to rectify whatever the switch function is. So just a little note about guarded switches. They're usually in a lot, even in normal procedures, even in amplified procedures, they're just something you verify a position. It's not something that you're going to be utilizing.
I'll mention here that once you have confirmed that the alternate flaps is off, that is actually the completion of the preliminary safety element of this electrical startup procedure. So from here, we're actually going to go ahead and get the power established.
Now that we've finished the preliminary part and safety check of the electrical power up amplified procedure, we are going to go ahead and establish ground power, meaning that we are going to select the primary external power switch first. You will hear some sounds. The aircraft will now come to life, quote unquote. After that, once you've realized that everything is established, you're going to go ahead and click that secondary external power switch because this aircraft needs a lot of power, and you do need to have both hookups selected and on the bus in order to get all of the systems of the aircraft powered and energized while you are on the ground.
So, Felix, we're back here in the main cockpit view, and I hear some noise, but still I don't see anything on the screens. What's happening?
So right now, the screen and EFIS system is actually going through what's called a built-in test. And so you'll start seeing the screens flash a little bit. You'll start seeing hearing some noises, some weird tones. Don't worry, the aircraft's not bugged. Nothing's happened. It's just that the electronic flight information system, mainly the LCD screens that you see in front of you, are testing to ensure that when they're powered up, that they're going to operate correctly. And now, as you can see, the self test is gonna work out. The screens are gonna start flickering. They're gonna pop up. We've actually cut out a part of this because this sequence from cold and dark can take up to 3 minutes to fully complete the self test for the screen startup.
Yeah, and this is one of the key reasons why in the real world, when pilots come on this plane, it's typically already powered up. There's much to be done to get this thing ready to head out for the day, and that's where maintenance and other personnel get involved to make this a simpler process for everyone. Now, that completes the electrical startup process. And from here, a couple of things could happen depending on whether or not you're pilot flying or pilot monitoring or captain or first officer, depending on your particular carrier that you're interested in replicating their ops, you might begin the pre-flight procedure, or you might be asked to go outside and do the walk around. In our case, our next tutorial is going to focus on the walk around. Now, keeping in mind that a walk around in the sim is still a little bit tricky, so we're going to focus on a couple of things that we think you might find interesting about the plane on the outside, as well as one or two items that PMDG actually lets you check when you're on the outside. And maybe in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, we'll have a more advanced avatar system that'll make walkarounds even more useful and fun. But we'll see you in the next one, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.